pounded the table with his fist. He leaned toward Beth. "I accept your challenge," he said. Patrick watched as the pieces were arranged. Beth used the white ones. Eric used the red ones. Her hands looked very small compared to the Vikings. The game lasted a long time. Patrick paced. He saw Leif watching them closely. Eric was a smart player, but so was Beth. After an hour, only 9 pieces were left on the board. Beth had 3 pawns, a bishop, and her king. Eric had 1 pawn, a rook, his queen, and his king. "We can stop now," Eric said to Beth. "You can see that I have better pieces than you do. The cape is as good as mine." "We'll see," Beth said. Eric picked up his queen. He plunked it down near Beth's king. "Check," he said. Eric then looked at Patrick. "Give me the silver cape, boy," he said. Patrick frowned. He began to take off the cape. "Wait, Patrick," Beth said. "Not so fast." She picked up a pawn. It was the smallest and weakest piece on the board. She moved it 1 space forward. The move blocked Eric's queen. "Checkmate," she said. Eric glared at the board. How did you do that?" he roared. Hilda laughed. "She has also trapped you," she said, "with a little pawn." "She must have cheated," he shouted. "I cannot be beaten by a little girl." The crowd shrank back from him. They were afraid of what he might do. Hilda put a hand on his shoulder. "My husband, the girl won fairly," she said calmly. Eric stood up. His face turned a deep red with anger. "No!" he howled. He pulled his sword out of the holder, arms straight as he held it in the air. His arms started to tremble with rage. "Remember your honor," Hilda said softly. Bam! Eric threw the sword down on the table. He then turned, pushed through the crowd. One by one, the Vikings around the game table left. Most of them followed Eric to the fire ring. The musicians began to play again. Beth thought it would feel good to beat Eric. But she felt sad as she put the chess pieces back in her sack. Winning the sword didn't seem right somehow. Leif came over to them. That was a risky thing to do. "What will you do with the sword?" "It isn't for us to keep," Patrick said. "Oh," Leif said. He lifted an eyebrow in surprise. "Though I always wanted a sword, Patrick said. And this one was beautiful. He picked it up from the table. It was heavy. He looked at the jewel. Mr. Whitaker would be so pleased to see it. He then used both hands to slide the sword into his belt. Hilda came up behind the cousins. She put one hand on each of their shoulders. It's time for us to leave, she said. You have warned the other Christians? Leaf asked her. She nodded. Warn them about what? Beth asked. The sacrifices to the gods are about to begin, Hilda replied. Beth and Patrick turned to look at the fire ring. Many of the Viking men and women were now dancing around it. Cups were in their hands. They threw liquid on the fire. What are they doing? Beth asked Leaf. They are throwing beer onto the fire, Leaf said, as a sacrifice to a false god. The fire hissed and flared. The yellow light cast a strange glow on everything. A deep sadness crossed over Leaf's face. My mother is right, he said. This is no place for Christians or children.